Scrutiny is mounting on the Secret Service for a pretty good reason. I think we are all in agreement about that. Secret Service under pressure for shooter who got clear shot at Trump. For more than a half century since the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the Secret Service has routinely surveyed and secured all structures near major national political events to prevent gunfire from reaching a president or anyone else under the agency's protection. But somehow on Saturday, a man wielding a semi-automatic rifle was able to access a roof just 140 yards from the stage where former President Donald Trump was speaking. Now under scrutiny for its worst security breach since the 1981 attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, the Secret Service is facing pressure to determine whether it failed to devote enough resources to the protection of a former president turned presumptive nominee. Among the questions agency officials are seeking to answer, according to a senior official, is whether the agency suffered a critical breakdown in communications with the local police in Butler, Pennsylvania, who were assigned to secure the outer perimeter where the gunman positioned himself on the roof of a nearby building. President Biden said Sunday that he had directed the Secret Service to review all security measures for the Republican National Convention, which takes place this week in Milwaukee, and he said he had ordered an independent review of the security at Saturday's rally. Lawmakers in both parties are calling on the Secret Service Director, Kimberly Cheadle, to account for decisions that may have left key responsibilities to local authorities, and law enforcement officials and experts are expressing shock at what they say is an obvious failure by the agency to plan for a Trump rally in a period of rising national polarization. Kevin P. Rojek, the FBI special agent in charge of the Pittsburgh field office, said it was surprising that the gunman was able to open fire on the stage before being killed. Cheadle, the Secret Service director, sent a memo to her agents on Sunday lauding their fast action to evacuate Trump after shots were fired. The attempted assassination of former President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, is a moment that forever will be remembered in history, she said in the memo, according to a section that was read to the Washington Post. The Secret Service moved quickly in this situation and neutralized the threat. More on that later, but here is a snippet of an interview that she did with ABC saying the buck stops with me, but resisting calls to step down.
Responsible for this happening?
What I would say is that the Secret Service is responsible for the protection of the former president.
So the buck stops with you?
The buck stops with me. I am the director of the Secret Service. It was unacceptable, and it's something that shouldn't happen again.
The President and Homeland Security Secretary said today they had 100% confidence in you, but there are some members of Congress calling on you to resign.
I appreciate the Secretary's comments, and we're going to continue to be transparent and communicate with people.
Do you plan to stay on? Absolutely.
I do plan to stay on.
All right, so there's been much reporting in recent days, some of which is old news by now, as to the sort of intricacies of these breakdowns. But we'll read a little more here. CBS broke this a couple days ago. Snipers were stationed inside the building as the Trump rally shooter climbed up to the roof. Local officer says from CBS. 3 snipers were stationed inside building used in Trump assassination attempt. There were 3 snipers stationed inside the building the shooter used to Saturday's shooting of former President Donald Trump, a local law enforcement officer with direct knowledge of the incident tells CBS News. The operations plan had them stationed inside the building looking out windows towards the rally. The information about the 3 snipers being inside the building was first reported by BeaverCountian.com. Mo, Larry, and Curly in there, apparently. The guy climbs up a ladder. I mean, it's like it's almost out of an absurdist farce.
I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah. One of the snipers inside saw Thomas Matthew Crooks outside and looking up at the roof, observing the building and disappearing, a local law enforcement officer tells CBS News. I'm going to read that again because it bears repeating. One of the snipers inside saw Thomas Matthew Crooks outside and looking up at the roof, observing the building and disappearing, a law enforcement officer tells CBS News. What? Crooks came back, sat down, and looked at his phone. At that point, one of the snipers took a picture of him. Crooks took out a rangefinder, and the sniper radioed to the command post. Crooks disappeared again and then came back a third time with a backpack. The snipers called in with information that he had a backpack and said he was walking towards the back of the building. Officers believe that Crooks might have used an air conditioning unit to get on top of the roof. By the time the other officers came for backup, he had climbed on top of the building and was positioned above and behind the snipers inside the building, the officer said. 2 other officers who heard the sniper's call tried to get onto the roof. State police started rushing to the scene, but by that time, a Secret Service sniper had already killed Crooks, the officer said. I mean, that is what you would expect to read on, like, InfoWars, right? Like that. This is what you would expect to read on some site that you didn't trust, right? This is where you would expect to read this with no sourcing. CBS News reports that they saw him 3 times. You had 3 guys in there. They saw him 3 times, and he makes his way up onto the roof. We're not done. Trump rally shooter was reported as a suspicious person an hour before opening fire. This is NBC. The gunman who opened fire at former President Donald Trump's Pennsylvania rally was reported as a suspicious person and photographed 1 hour before he began shooting, according to 2 sources familiar with a briefing for senators Wednesday. Secret Service and FBI officials shared a timeline of events that revealed troubling new details about the assassination attempt and raised questions about why Secret Service officials allowed Trump to take the stage. Thomas Matthew Crooks, who had a rangefinder and a backpack with him, was reported as a suspicious person 1 hour before he began shooting, Senator John Barrasso, Republican from Wyoming, said in a statement after the briefing. This was a 100% cover-your-ass briefing, Barrasso said. He had a rangefinder and a backpack. The Secret Service lost sight of him. Roughly 30 minutes after the initial suspicious person report, Pennsylvania State Police notified the Secret Service of a suspicious person at 5:51 p.m. The Secret Service notified its snipers at 5:53, 2 minutes later, the sources said. At 6:02, Trump took the stage. At 6:09, members of the crowd notified that Crooks, 20, was on a rooftop. 2 minutes later, Crooks opened fire on Trump at 6:11. So look at that. Look at that. I mean, that's just incredible. Senators were also told that Crooks visited the site of the assassination attempt last week, the sources said. Barrasso said Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle should be removed. No one has taken responsibility, Barrasso said. Someone has died. The former president was almost killed. The head of the Secret Service needs to go. The agency did not immediately respond to requests for comment. So here's some video of the Secret Service director refusing to answer to the American people. This was tweeted out by Marsha Blackburn. The sound on this is pretty tough to hear, so we're not going to play much of it, but this will just give you an idea of how things went here.
Necessary from you. Very disappointed in your leadership. Very disappointed in your leadership. Your resignation, and either you resign tonight or start answering our questions right now about the death threat to President Trump and allowing him to go on stage in Pennsylvania at a time when he'd already been alerted that there was somebody with a spotter. All these situations already identified an hour before, and you let him go on stage without the knowledge of him, the team on the ground, and you will put him within less than an inch of his life. So resignation or full explanation to us right now.
We have trying to get our questions out, and he never was running the phone. It was not an event. The director, who was nearly killed. You mean an hour out, you have a suspicious person, and at 5:51, according to the timeline of your deputy, you identified a potential threat. And then at 5:52, you told, or someone told, that the sniper, that he was there. But can you give us an explanation? Why would anyone allow the president to go on stage when you know you've got a potential threat and you've got snipers that are trained? Why? I don't think that this is the format at this discussion.
Well, you hung up on. We're you cut off the meeting short.
This hospitality salute is actually to thank the partners who have helped secure the Republican National Convention, and I would not want to take away from their safety.
Well, we can find a place to go right now.
She's trying to duck them, it sounds like.
All right, just like again.
So they're trying to get a time. The sound there is really bad. They probably should have subtitled that piece. But yeah, if you look at the timeline again, this is what they're referencing there. 5:51, Secret Service notified its snipers. Okay, so notified of a suspicious person at 5:51, and then the shot was fired 20 minutes later. I mean, there's no excuse for that. Period. I mean, 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I mean, what do you say to that? What does she say to that? Nothing, apparently.
Yeah, she should really. Is it somewhat symbolic? I can't imagine that these problems in the agency, if indeed these are innocent problems, which itself is open to question. I can't imagine they started under her tenure, but that's called the buck stops here. That's called responsibility. This happened on your watch. You resigned.
Of course.
The idea that she's not resigning with, as the article said, the greatest failure of the Secret Service since the Reagan assassination attempt in '81, of course you resign. You take responsibility. You're the head of the agency. Of course, it's a symbolic role. Does she sit there and control day-to-day disposition of Secret Service agents? I'm sure that's not the case, but you run the agency, man. You got to resign. That aside, it's hard to say. We're in an America where incompetence is spreading like a wildfire. So is it gross incompetence of everyone involved, or is it something more nefarious? It's very difficult to say. Obviously, the circumstances are extremely bizarre.
Yes, they're extremely bizarre. And look, we don't work in the field, obviously, but we've covered this enough. We've learned about this enough. We did a whole segment, which we clipped as a separate piece, that emphasized a focus on the overhead map, the layout. As events go, and again, we're speaking as laymen here, obviously, it seems to me like this was a relatively easy venue to secure because it's relatively secluded. There aren't, 50 rooftops surrounding where the stage is. It's not in the middle of like Washington Square Park where people could be stationed anywhere. This is a situation where you had half a dozen buildings, half a dozen rooftops to secure. I don't buy that you couldn't have staffed a person on every rooftop, especially since you had local police, especially since you have people inside the building. Why have 3 people stationed inside the building and not put one of them on top of the building? Why were 3 people in the building and no one on the roof? That makes no sense. There is no good explanation for that, whether it's incompetence or something worse. There just is no good explanation. And yes, if you're the head of the agency and that happens on your watch, even if it's not, as Russell said, your fault, the buck stops there. And if you are as concerned as so much of the political leadership class is concerned that people's trust in these institutions are eroding, well, the way to restore some trust is to take accountability when something goes wrong and saying, this happened on my watch. I can't be here anymore. I can't be responsible for this anymore. That's how you get accountability. That's how you restore some measure of trust in these institutions. When a shot is fired at the president and it comes out that you had ample warning that something was happening in a relatively secluded area that, as compared to, a highly populated, densely populated urban environment, should be relatively easy to secure, that is a catastrophic failure. And the only responsible response to that is to step down. Whether it's your fault or not, the greater good comes first.
The only thing I will say on the side of basic incompetence is this. I read a book quite a few years ago about the history of the CIA. And it was very interesting in that it illustrated that the CIA was always a relatively incompetent intelligence agency by comparison to its opposite number, the KGB or the British Secret
MI6,
Service,
right? Yeah.
MI6. And, you know, you can speculate on why. The most obvious reason is we're geographically isolated. We have a population that is notoriously uninterested in the rest of the world. So we don't develop the kind of society that would make good secret agents, good intelligence officers. But
Too much corn in the diet.
Too much corn in the diet, although not too much soy.
Right.
We don't produce, well, now we're producing those soy boys. But you never really had that kind of intelligence agency that is omnipotent the way that it is portrayed in the movies. And that's because a lot of these movies coordinate with the government to get access to military equipment for their shots, access to military bases. So they'll give these very agencies final approval of scripts in exchange for material support. So the movies and TV have given us this impression of almost godlike powers of our intelligence agencies. And certainly that's true of the Secret Service. You get the impression of the Secret Service as being incredibly competent. But just like with the CIA, that could just be propaganda. They may be deeply incompetent and very lucky.
Yes. It certainly is a question. It's an open question as much as, you know, it looks fishy. You know, this is why you say there needs to be an investigation, because, and this is what we said on the day of, like, there are enough dots here to think they could be connected in some way. The challenge is getting to the bottom of that. But in the short term, like, if these people actually cared about public trust, of course you step down. You had, according to that timeline there, 20 minutes, 5:51 to 6:11, at least 20 minutes. Now, they're saying they spotted him earlier, right? Even if you don't assign an exact time, even if you can't assign an exact timeline to that at this point, 20 minutes pass before you were notified of a suspicious character. They had eyes on him. CBS says the 3 snipers inside had eyes on him. They lost eyes on him, and then he shot at the president. That's a career ender right there.
Right.
I mean, how could it not be? It's absurd. It's absurd. It's not even a question.
Of course.
Please clap.